All right, my name is Brad Piehl. As Ryan was telling you, I'm a forest hydrologist. Didn't give you any other information about me, but I live up in the mountains in Colorado. Was out blowing snow before this, so it's good news, Eric. We got some more snow coming. And it kind of is my bio. We were talking about the Watershed Wildfire Protection Group. This really sprung up in Colorado as a result of a couple major fires. We've had the Buffalo Creek Fire and the Hayman Fire in particular that had some dramatic impacts on water supply, and as well as the forest and people's safety. So that really was the impetus behind the Watershed Wildfire Protection Group, and really what, actually we didn't start on the first slide. There's the first slide. And so this is a real kind of diverse group of some real technical people that got together back in '07, and I had the pleasure to facilitate this group for a year and come up with a technical approach to watershed assessments that kind of fit what we're thinking of, what we experienced in Colorado. And Eric was part of that group too. And so what we came with was a procedure, the technical procedure that looked at some key components of what we thought would be a hazard assessment for protecting watersheds from wildfires and their impacts to water supply. And so I'll show you a couple of the, one of the applications of this. Go through our implemented actually 16 what we call phase 1 assessments, and some of these were completed through this as a result of the bark beetle initiative. We had a big mountain pine beetle epidemic that's basically over now, and in response to that, we did a number of national forests, the watersheds there, and then one of the things that we didn't envision when we created this procedure was that there should be a stakeholder process. So we created a technical process, and really when you get the stakeholders together, which are water providers such as Eric and probably several of you, and these U.S. Forest Service, State Forest Service here, and some of the local towns and counties, we have a number of people that were very interested in being involved in this process. So that became another piece of what we push in these assessments, was to get everybody on board and understand what this tool meant and kind of how to apply it. So you can see the map. This is Colorado. You can see some of them went up into Wyoming. The orange ones are the phase 1s I was talking about that have not gone through the stakeholder process, and then the blue ones are ones that have gone through both the technical and the stakeholder process. And the Cucharas River down in South Colorado is still in process. We're working on a number of pieces of finishing that one up. Most of them have been done, but working on a couple pieces to that, so that's not really complete yet. And so what are the components? Obviously, we want to look at wildfire hazard, and that was completed through, if you're interested in the technical details, I'm not going to go through them because, you know, then my part would probably be like 2 hours instead of 10 minutes. So I'm not going to do that, but we used a series of there's different modeling approaches that we've used in different areas. Flooding, debris flow hazard. This is primarily a look at ruggedness as one factor, and then we looked at road density also to come up with a flooding road, debris flow hazard piece. Soil erodibility, we really looked at the NRCS data and a matrix that they presented in some technical research that allowed us to do K-factor and slope. Water supply, where are those pieces of water supply infrastructure there? Where are they at risk? And then finally, we looked at zones of concern. I'll show you maps of all this stuff. It probably makes sense when we look at them. But the concern are we knew that following like the Buffalo Creek fire, we had a major debris flow that basically traveled 11 miles upstream the Strontia Springs Reservoir, looked just around the key infrastructure pieces. We had to look upstream. And so zones of concern are our way of drawing watershed boundaries up into the forest above some of these reservoirs and diversion structures, water supply infrastructure, and trying to figure out where to focus our efforts. Mapping these things, and this is what wildfire hazard looks like. This is Pikes Peak. So this is the Pikes Peak watershed, and so you can see Pikes Peak to the right of that map. That's I-25, or excuse me, Colorado Springs is to the right of that map. That's I-25 there, and then Highway 24 runs up through there. Pikes Peak is kind of to the south. It's kind of to the middle of that map. And so this is there's some major water supply infrastructure. Colorado Springs utilities here, so they're obviously very interested. There's other municipalities that have some water supply components here, some smaller municipalities as well. So we had a number of stakeholders in this one, a very interesting process. So what we did was we took these 6-level watersheds, and this is part of the process, and then ranked each one on wildfire hazard, and then categorized those, and prioritized. So this is that map. It's not showing how the 6-level watersheds rank against each other in terms of wildfire hazard. And this is how we use this ranking method and categorization method to combine different technical analyses into one. So I'll show you that combination as we kind of run through these real quick. Flooding debris flow hazard. Again, this is, as I mentioned before, this is a combination of ruggedness and road density. To combine those two and then get these, we took out some of the road densities that were within these. Soil erodibility, this is that. So there are some soils here in some places, not as much as the Upper South Platte, which is just north of there, but we did adjust for that.
Hey, Brad, we have a question from Porfirio. He's wondering if the zones of concern you were talking about created to values at risk. Do you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, so we've got the zones of concern map is coming up really quickly, and we can talk about that. Oh, I see the questions. I should have been looking at that. Thank you for interrupting me.
No problem.
So the zones of concern, and we'll get to that in just one second. So this is a composite hazard. So this is those first 3 put together. So you combine the rankings for each one and put them all together and then recategorize them. And this is kind of like the, can't change that much out there, and what the combination of those things look like. And then and when you look at this map, so those red areas are the high priority, orange ones are next. These are the composite hazard map. And then what we did was look at water supply. These are all the watersheds that have a water supply component to them. Those are more important. They got ranked higher. So this is the final priority map. So when you overlay that water supply piece on the composite hazard map, then this is the map now, and this is the one that Eric Howell looks at and says, "Oh my, we're in trouble," because up in the Headwaters Fountain Creek watershed, that's where they've got a number of water supply reservoirs. They're relying on a number of these watersheds for their water supply and their system. So You know, this is kind of highlighting where all those pieces come together, including water supply. And getting, these are the zones of concern now. This is over that final priority hazard. And so you can see those hatched areas. And basic areas drawn above water supply, key water supply infrastructure. So we could call those values at risk, but what we really wanted to, what we were trying to use these for is to say, we're looking at specific location system and you want to protect them, you would want to look in the zone of concern. They're between 5 and 11 stream miles upstream of those reservoirs or diversion points. And some of them wide and they're, you know, they're smaller, they're shorter than that. But so the initial look at, if you're concerned about these, and you'll see there's a number of these zones of concern are in these high priority and highest priority watersheds, you know, you would be concerned about that if they were yours. And then you would look within those zones of concern to say, what can we do? Is there anything to do here? And you know, that really kind of led to what our next part of these assessments were. When we first started out, we just kind of stopped here and handed this off to the water supply agencies, and then they, so a lot of times, didn't really know what to do with it. So we added on one more piece, which we call constraints. So we looked within each one of those zones of concern in these assessments, and we filtered out steep slopes, that's a constraint. Land ownership is either an opportunity or special management. So we're looking at wilderness and roadless, and some of you know in Colorado we've got special roadless rules. So we've got 2 different categories. And then we looked at what kind of target vegetation. In other words, we're not going to go manage necessarily meadows or or in some cases we can't manage spruce fir high on steep slopes that we have no access to. And so we started looking at what's our target vegetation that we wanted. Mostly this is forest. We were concerned mostly about forest fires. Sorry. And road access is another key piece to it. So, you know, if we have access via roads, then that would be a big benefit. And if we don't, that's kind of a major constraint. We can do, and we're trying to do some things such as fuel breaks, even potentially helicopter logging, and some great fuel breaks. That's really expensive, and logistically it can be more difficult. But so where there's roads, they not only help us with access for equipment, but they also help us with, sometimes we can create fuel breaks around roads, and so they're a feature on the landscape that's pretty important. And so this really messy map is a way to, incorporates all those pieces. And when we go through these stakeholder meetings, we kind of build this up one piece at a time. But you can see there's slopes in here and forest management actions that have happened already. As you can see, North Catamount Reservoirs had some completed treatments, and I'm sure, Eric, this is probably outdated by now, and you probably have more done. And you see the roadless areas are here. So we're really now looking, where can you find the combination of the target vegetation, slopes that are more gentle, outer roadless, everything, you know, relatively close to roads, and start looking in those zones of concern and saying, these make sense. And now you can get the stakeholders together and start targeting places within these zones of concern where you could maybe try to do something and try to reduce the impact of fire on that area, or potentially do a fuel break, or allow access for suppression teams, things like that. There's a number of different aspects, and one of the things we've added on recently is looking at road stream crossings, and because we know after fire there's a lot of debris and higher peak flows, and so those we've roads blow out after fires because of those factors. So if we find those critical road stream crossings that are really undersized and fix those ahead of the fire, then, and that has other benefits too, including, you know, after floods or increased fish passage, public safety, all those other aspects. They're expensive, but they have other benefits. So that's kind of nice. The other thing we've been doing is finding locations for potential sediment basins following a fire, because some of these places, if you look at where there's wilderness, roadless, we have much ability to do physical actions on the landscape to mitigate any potential concerns. I mean, we're only going to be able to mitigate a certain amount anyway, even if, so if we can locate sediment basins pre-fire and get agencies understanding what these are for and what they would look like, where they would be, how they'd be designed, we can even talk to landowners, private landowners, and get their permission ahead of time, then we can be really responsive and implement those quickly after a fire. I think that's my last slide. That is my last slide.
We have 2 questions in the chat box, Brad.
Yeah. Interior ponderosa is, it's just a classification. So I believe this, and this map was done a number of years ago. I'd have to look back. But it's just a classification of land fire data. And there's a number of different forest classifications. So it's, you know, basically we grouped it all together into ponderosa pine. And so now what we probably do is we probably take limber pine and fir and maybe some of the ponderosa pine and combine that and call that mixed conifer instead. That's just with this classification system that we used. And the other question was, what buffer to use for road stream crossings? Question on, not sure exactly what that means, Rebecca. I don't know if you could clarify that. So we're not proposing stream buffers, right? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Becca, and that's something we were discussing at a very recent meeting here in southwestern corner of Colorado. We were looking at identifying road stream crossings as, you know, here's where you're going to have a culvert, and for the purposes of kind of putting those as a value at risk on the map, I guess I'm thinking of something that might be like your zones of concern. You know, how far out would you go from a culvert? Do you take in everything up slope? Can we just put a little, you know, if a fire starts in an area close to that culvert versus further away, do we need to map a certain buffer size around that when we're considering that as a value?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, for these types of analysis, and we didn't do that here in Pikes Peak, but you know, the reason we're showing at Pikes Peak is because there are the next steps that Eric's going to talk about are really interesting. Is that, so we would look within these zones of concern or downstream a little ways and look at those road stream crossings and try to see where, you know, where it might make sense, that where there's one really at risk. And that's really kind of a, it's more of a kind of, you know, expert opinion exercise, looking at the mapping and looking at where roads are and kind of understanding where the landscape when you're out there. So we didn't do a specific area. If that makes any sense? All right, Eric, I think you were up.
All righty. Thanks.